everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at BEATNIK Buenos AIRES. This is a translation from Fantagraphics of a book by Diego Arandojo and Facundo Percio. Really, really cool book. Really like the art in this. The obvious what it's about, I would hope, is that it's about the beatnik movement as it manifested in this one particular community in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, kind of the revolutionary political art that was going on there. It's a very compelling book that I'm gonna have to go back and read at least one more time, because the way it's put together is kind of loose, like you would expect from the beat poets, the beat artists, like a little disorganized and poetic in that sense. But then it's also it feels like there's a lot of threads and connections like weaving through the behind the scenes of this book that I wasn't catching on to because I didn't know any of the characters yet. But in the back of the book, there's an actual list of the characters with some more biographical information. So when I have time to really sit down and read that, I want to go back, because this book really kind of sold me as interested in all these characters. So we're in Buenos Aires, Argentina in the 1960s. Each chapter is set in a different part of the 1960s. There's a lot of the same locations and a lot of characters show back over. That's why while I was reading it, I was trying to find like this kind of thread structure about like, oh, we're in this location and we end in this location, and then we start where we ended, or we characters. But each time I thought I was latching onto a structure like that, it kind of fell apart. But yeah, you're really just getting to know who all these different writers and painters are. Really awesome art throughout, where it looks like it's being done primarily with charcoal. So there's a lot of like smudging and erasing of the charcoal, and it leads to a nice, like really graphic style. Seems a little more atmospheric and moody as well. I quite like it. You meet a lot of really interesting characters that were real characters in the scene. Like this character is named Jalt, the Final Son. He's a fireman and an artist. He's obsessed with fires. He makes paintings of things burning, cars, houses. He paints everything being devoured by flames. And apparently this guy kind of formed a cult. So you're just learning all of these very strange characters in this scene. But then also you have these more poetic statements where it says, "At night we are all ashes. We seek a fire that gives us meaning." And you get those like little bits of poetry in there that catch you in the gut with like some bigger meaning. And that's pretty much how the story works in this, is you jump, like here's chapter 2, and you kind of jump over to a different character. There seems to be some relationship, like this one also has characters going and lighting stuff on fire. So I think there's a web of interrelated characters and places over a span of 7-8 years that were influential in this scene of artists. This character here is AIRES, the metaphysical photographer. I really like that idea that someone's trying to photograph things about people that capture something about them at a metaphysical level. Just shows the kind of thought that was going on in this time, the different ways people are pursuing their artistic practices. I'm sure that as I go back and got more familiar with all the different characters, these scenes where like a background character is staring at someone would be more relevant. It feels like one of those books that will unfold itself more with each reading. This is another page I really enjoyed the dialogue. "I observe. It doesn't matter if it takes me days. I observe. I study the work, every inch of it. I transfer it bit by bit into my brain. I remember the colors, the lines, the style. By the end of the exercise, I'm wiped out. I rest." And love just the art on this page as well. The kind of idea of, yeah, just like really coming to understand a piece of art. That all feels very right to me, whether it be someone else's or my own. But then this character also is taking this extra challenge that's really interesting, where she'll just go stare and stare and stare at a painting, totally commit it to memory, and then go create a forgery of it. That's basically her art practice. Really interesting idea. You can see the really awesome like graphic effects again of the charcoal art, the kind of brevity that people can get, and the looseness of charcoal art really lends a lot of like power to these scenes. Obviously, these are people who have really strong opinions about revolution, Fidel Castro art, and so they're getting in fights, calling each other fascist pigs. Really, really interesting bit of dialogue here. I miss some things. Being in prison keeps you on your toes. And the whole time he's like out getting drunk and then hooking up with this chick. Your cellmate's hateful looks that are somehow seductive. That reminds me of something a good friend said. Fucking is beautiful, especially if it's women. I just like the intensity of that little bit, you know, like, hey, you know, you do what you got to do when you're in jail. But the way they put it is just so, like, abrupt and brutal, I guess. This page expresses a moral struggle I've been having lately that I've been talking about in some other videos, like the kind of value and function of art. Says paper is not paper, letters are not letters, a book is not a book. A book is a mirror that takes our image and casts it back into the past, into the shadow of other worlds. The conception of a book is always painful because we steal an instant from eternity to make it ours. And I've been struggling with that a lot. That I spend so much time working on books and so much time talking about other people's books and so much time consuming television shows and music. I spend so much time in these shadows of other worlds, these insides of other people's heads put outside that aren't like you know, the real world, but there's these virtual worlds that represent other people's experiences. That those are all stealing moments from eternity and trying to make it mine in some sense. So I really, really like that page. And the guy, you know, while he's saying this, he's sitting there printing a book on an old school printing press. You know, he's inking up the rollers here, and you know, like I'm tempted to buy my own press and like print my own book. So I get it, but I also, yeah, I do often feel like I'm stealing moments that I shouldn't be stealing and compressing things. So really beautifully put things like that all throughout. And then you get to see like there's poets in here, there's people doing theater, there's people doing painting, like one of these really rich, vibrant art scenes that really like has a lot of cross pollination going on. But there's really intense stage play here where you have like this gigantic fake like vulva, vagina, clit up here, and like someone being birthed out of it live. The cops coming in and putting down like this gross, you know, outside performance art stuff. It's really capturing what must have been like the intensity of the scene at the time. So made me way more interested in this art scene as a really good bit of, I don't know if I can call it biography, but historical writing should. But it doesn't feel like I'm just getting a history lesson. I feel like I'm just reading a story that has veracity to it. And then in the back, you get what I was talking about, where it actually goes into the history a little bit more and talks about these people, confirming that they're real people actually, and that these aren't just made up. And so I really want to read these, go back, read each chapter, read this, read the chapter, read the whole thing. I feel like I need to read this 2 or 3 more times because it's that rich of a book. One thing that I found really interesting, and I did read these first two, is talking about this one character in the second chapter, Marcelo Fox, was someone who had a lot of like Nazism showing up in and also an interest in occultism, which I guess were both kind of like large ideas: existentialism, surrealism, surreal existentialism. They're throwing those words around. Occultism. Uh, it's interesting though, because I maybe, I mean, who knows? I'm just being conspiracy flapping my lips here, but you get all those stories about like people having fled to Argentina after World War II, like Nazis fleeing to Argentina, and I know the Nazis had a big occultist program. So when it's talking about those things being a kind of central part of the milieu that led to this beatnik movement in Buenos Aires in the 60s. It's just kind of interesting, like where that train of things come from. So I'll have to read the rest of the essays, and I don't know. I'm sure that someone's done research on all that already, but it just popped up as an interesting confluence of things I've heard. No veracity to that. I'm not claiming it. It's just a thought that popped in my head as I was reading the book. But I really enjoyed this. Like I said, I'm gonna have to read it a couple more times. I'm gonna have to look some of these artists up, which is exactly what a book like this should do. Is just make me more curious to find out more. Writing stunning, art stunning, fantastic book all the way through. Really, really glad I read it and highly recommend it.